And I said, this is for a podcast. And he asked me about the podcast and about relationship. And he goes, isn't it just so much easier to be by yourself? And I said, it sure is. But there's just so much more goodness, yumminess that comes when you are really serving the part of you that's really wired to connect with other beings. Because it is. I said, look, I've been in a divine relationship with myself for the past 4 years, but there's not a sense for me that I'm lacking a romantic relationship, but there's now a sense, a pull for me to expand and grow.
Welcome, beautiful beings, to season 2 of the Cosmic Love Antenna podcast with your host, Harrison Ma. This podcast sets the loving intention of creating the mystical space needed to pull back the layers restricting health, alignment, and love. Now let's walk you home to your cosmic spiritual heart space. Before we continue this beautiful chat today, wonderful souls, I need to jump in here to share something really exciting. If you've been following these episodes or you've been following me on social media, you know that I am in the process of releasing my first book, Your Cosmic Love Antenna, Define, Embody, and Emit Your Unique Frequency of Love. And at the time of this episode release, pre-orders are now open. If you have been pulled to this show, if you're looking to understand the what, the how, and the why of love, if you're looking to apply some of the tools connected to your chakras, inner child, releasing religious trauma, ancestral healing, emotional release, and so much more, then this beautiful expression from my heart to yours is for you. If you are looking to channel more of your unique gifts and the divine frequency that you are, these pages will open all of this up. And if you're interested, all you need to do is go to cosmicloveantenna.com. That's cosmicloveantenna.com. And you can pre-order this book right now. If you pre-order, click on that link, put in your email, you're going to get access to some special gifts that I'm only offering to those who get in before I release it fully. These gifts are going to be some more channeled meditations, activations, and some other surprises from my heart to yours. So head over to cosmicloveantenna.com, pre-order this beautiful expression, and I can't wait to hear how it shifts your life. If you're listening to this after pre-order sales, that same link can be also used to go to the direct purchase link. Sending love, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of this episode today. Good morning, evening, afternoon, magical loving beings. Welcome back to the show. Welcome back to another deep dive, spiritual, loving, and romantic conversation today on all things cosmic love. Today's theme being divine relationships, partnerships, and love itself. I have a beautiful soul and guest to introduce to you in a moment and have a dance around within these themes. But as always, setting a bit of a loving foundation here as we begin this chat. If you're joining today live on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, please remember you can leave your comments, your questions, anything that bubbles up within the chat Ozzy and I will be having, and we'd love to add you into the conversation. If you want to join these chats in the future, you can join the Cosmic Love Antenna Facebook group and become a part of the tribe. And if you get some value out of this today, if you're listening to the podcast, please share this out far and wide with a lover, a family member, or a friend that you think it can awaken some loving insights in their heart today. Speaking of beautiful, loving insights, I have the divine Ozzy Osbourne on the chat, on the show, in the conversation today. Ozzy is a love and relationship practitioner. And I want to just read you a bit of her bio because I think it highlights why I'm so excited to have this conversation. Ozzy supports individuals and couples in embodying their humanness so they be the love they want to see. And within this beautiful little basket today, Ozzy and I are going to chat about what it means to have a divine relationship to what it means to be that love that you want to see. What are the barriers of past disconnection? Why is communication and honesty so important? What is projection? I'm sure we're going to speak about the inner child and so much more. Ozzy, welcome to the Cosmic Love Antenna, my friend.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
I was commenting for people watching live on YouTube and Facebook. You have a beautiful setup and your voice sounds super crispy. And other than the fact that that's just very pleasant, I think in many ways what it does is it helps us hear your heart a lot deeper. I'm wondering, and maybe we can start with this, Ozzy. What is the role in your experience of the voice in helping us to expand deeper into a divine and loving relationship or partnership? Why is authentic communication? Why is honest communication powerful in starting to build a loving relationship?
Okay, that's great. Such a good question. I would say that the reason why authentic communication is important and vital is that it invites us to be authentically ourselves. When we are authentically ourselves, we can attract more authentic beings, and we can really be with the truth of our heart. And sometimes the truth of our heart isn't very pleasant, not for us, not for someone else. But I think there's something really beautiful, just plain being honest about where you're at so that you can meet yourself where you're at and you can work with it.
What if meeting yourself where you're at is difficult? And what I mean by that is, especially as a relationship begins, I know in my experience, that is very fertile ground for all of your shadows to come up, all of your past limitations and wounds. So what would you say to someone like me or anyone listening that wants to be authentic with their words and their communication, but they feel overwhelmed by a lot of their past stories, beliefs, and experiences that make them want to do the opposite, make them just want to shut down, make them just want to stay in their little box of safety?
I would say it must be really cozy there. I don't know one human that doesn't experience the hardship of being completely where you're at and being present and being willing to share your heart. Part of this idea that is required within relationships, especially divine relationships, which are sacred relationships, is opening your heart. While it's hard, doing it anyway. And I always say baby steps. The overwhelm comes from you're going against your natural self, or so your state of being that you've created for yourself, because your natural state is actually quite beautiful and present and loving. And we've been conditioned and we've learned how to be everything but that. And it's our way of protecting our heart. So yes, of course, it's hard and it's mucky, it's crunchy, and it's not exactly a nice warm bath until you start to practice it, and then it becomes more and more. Again, it's that divine feeling, it's that alignment, it's that feeling of I've landed, I'm home, I'm here, I'm exactly where I need to be. And again, it takes practice, because for as long as you've been alive, you've learned the opposite of it, and so going against that, it's an unknown. So of course, more fears come along with that and prevents us from really sort of being in this state of true vulnerability and true intimacy. And I see this often with people, that intimacy is real, which is into me you see, the courage to be seen. As a human being, it's probably the hardest practice to get to. It's the hardest, but we're all practitioners. So if we could just learn, I don't like to use the word just, if we can learn to practice a little bit of that every single day, and what that might look like, I would imagine that'd be your next question. Well, what would that look like? How can I practice it? It's really finding moments. It's finding pleasure in moments. that allows you to experience this present moment, because there's nothing but pleasure in this very moment. Even if there's chaos outside, even if there are hardships, even if there's something that's going to meet you on the other side of that, if you could just practice a few moments.
I think a big part of everything you just beautifully expressed is coming to the acceptance and the understanding that those crunchy moments, as you pointed out, are just as equally a part of why we are here as is the pleasurable bliss that we get to when we move through them. I think a part of that loving journey back to self is understanding that the shadows, the pain, the trauma, the beliefs, the stories, they aren't a means to an end. They are the end. They are I'll say it from this angle, and I would love to get your reflections on this. If we are, and we'll just go straight to the deepest place already, Ozzy, because I know you can go there. If we are love experiencing itself, or God experiencing itself, or the divine experiencing the divine, then the divine came here to experience all of itself. It didn't come here just to be in the bliss. It didn't come here just to be in the pleasure and the love. It wants to be in those things, but it also wants to be in the crunchiness. It also wants to be in the shit. It wants to be in that triggered fight or flight response, because that too gives it value. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love how you said that. We're all observers, right, of our experiences. And you're right, it's not one or the other, it's both, right? You can't have light without darkness. You can't have good without bad. It's on the same coin. And so I truly believe we came here to have an experience. And for expansion, we have to go through the shadowing, the crunchy, the parts that we don't like, the hardships, the obstacles, the ups and the downs. And it's through those seasons that we become seasoned and we become more enlightened. Just comes to mind, right? There's a sense of enlightenment.
That's exactly what it is. I think enlightenment is less of a destination, and it's more of a opportunity and a choice we get to open up to in any given moment, where we make that choice to move through it, right? I want to step back a little bit, Ozzy, and ask you another question here that is probably going to bring up some other aspects that we can dive into. And I just want to point out, Ali is a big fan of your crunchy moments. She loves it in the chat, so giving you some love there.
Thanks, Ali.
The question I want to ask you, Ozzy, is a big part of your work, from what I've heard from you, what you've expressed with me, is being the love we want to see. Being that, let's use the divine relationship or the divine partnership. If I'm wanting to bring that into my existence, one of the first steps, if not the first step, is doing this, being what we want in the partner we desire to attract. So I'm wondering if you can start to break down the importance of this. Why not just, I'll be devil's advocate, why not just go out into the world and find the person and force it, rather than doing my own inner work?
Well, anytime there's force, there is resistance. And when there's resistance, you're going against something that's really supposed to be more in flow, right? It's the opposite of flow. And it brings on more resistance. Resistance begets more resistance. So I truly, truly believe that when you can sit in stillness and recognize what it is that you truly, truly desire in yourself, in your life, in your partner, in your experiences, in your adventures, whatever it might be, it's exactly it for you. It's different than what it is for you, what it is for me, what it is for everyone else. It is what your heart desires. And the only way to really listen to the heart is to be in stillness and to ask questions and to just listen. just to really listen to your heart. What are you being pulled towards? And then get more of that. When you're seeking and you are focusing and you're forcing, there is an energy that is going to, again, create that resistance.
Yeah.
And you're most likely going to attract or magnetize something of similar like, and you're going to be a match for that. And then you're going to get frustrated, and then you're going to be mad at the whole world of dating. And then the external world will be on the hook for all of it. And so it's really, this is a personal journey. This is not a journey of seeking, as you said, it's not a destination. It really is. And yes, you could put yourself out there and just say, okay, here I am, come date me. And you'll have your lessons, and you will have your moments and your season, and it'll most likely give you information about yourself if you're aware and awake to it. And if you're willing to receive it, you can grow with it. The opposite of that, which is what most people tend to do, is they use it, or they make the external world the enemy. And then they make themselves their ego, right? Because a divine relationship is not with ego, it's all heart. And so it really creates an enemy out of dating or men or women or whatever you want to, whatever you want to blame or shame or be in judgment of. And really all the external is a mirror and a reflection of what's really happening inside. So you could either use it as information and say, okay, this is what I don't want. This doesn't work for me. This doesn't light me up. Because again, going back to the meaning of divine relationship to me feels expansive. It feels open. It feels light. It feels yummy. It feels, I have goosebumps thinking about it.
And it's all those things, Ozzy, because it's you with you, right? We talked about it a second ago. When you attract in this divine partnership or this divine dynamic, ultimately part of this, and I don't want to say goal, because goal also is mind-based and ego-based, but let's say the intention here of this relationship is for you to be with another you, to be with you in its fullest expression. And this is actually, let's go here now. I didn't plan to talk about this, but I want to get your opinion on this. In my opinion, the most divine partnerships or the most divine relationships are ones where you are dating yourself, are ones where you are loving yourself. In many ways, I think the deepest form of love for someone else is you recognizing either that which you love in you that is in them, or that which you are trying to become that is also in them. So do you agree with this, Ozzy? Do you agree with this, or do you have a different thought?
Yes. However, I see too many people rely on it as a crutch to not connect and not create, because the object or the intention of relationships is it's an opportunity for growth, and we are hardwired for connection. So yes, the most divine relationship you can have is the one with yourself and the higher source, whatever it is for you. Yes, it is. And then your relationship with another divine being is that much more powerful. And it's really there for you to create and for you to share this love with the rest of the world. That's how I see and how I view those types of relationships. I don't think that, because yes, we can, I was just having this conversation today with, when I went to purchase this equipment for my podcasting, the guy asked me about, right, you're the first person I get to, you're popping the cherry. And I said, this is for a podcast. And he asked me about the podcast and about relationship. And he goes, isn't it just so much easier to be by yourself? And I said, it sure is. but there's just so much more goodness, yumminess that comes when you are really serving the part of you that's really wired to connect with other beings. Because it is. I said, look, I've been in a divine relationship with myself for the past 4 years, but there's not a sense for me that I'm lacking a romantic relationship, but there's now a sense, a pull for me to expand and grow.
Yeah. So I love this. Let's hit on this point here, Leslie, because this is very significant. This difference that you're highlighting, and I want to make sure people hear it. And I'm going to use my story as an example. I found myself in many of those relationships in the past of wanting to fill a hole inside of me that up to that point I was unable to do for myself, or unaware that I could do for myself, and was getting into relationships where now the other person was filling that space would people be familiar with it, in a codependent dynamic, and led to a lot of hurt, pain, shadows, projection, all the things. So spending time going inwards, there comes a point, as you just highlighted, where when you go in to it for a certain amount of time, and this will be different for everyone, you get to a point where you can't help but want to share that, let's call it love, let's call it intimacy, let's call it pleasure, let's call it ecstasy. You can't help but have a natural desire to not just share it with family, friends, but your heart expands and is pulled to that's now a relationship dynamic. But instead of filling a hole, it's 2 full cups coming together to create something more. So I'm wondering, is there anything more you want to add to these 2 very similar dynamics, but very different in the ultimate sort of scheme of things?
I think you really hit the nail on the head. I think that it's you're great and divine on your own, but when you add another divine experience to that, there's just so much more. There's so much more you can do. There's so much more you can create. And I think that I want to just sort of go back to what you mentioned about filling the void. You're not alone in that. I think we've all on our journeys in one season or another have sought to fill what we feel we lack, because for me, it's the absence of connection. It's the absence of connection with our heart and connection with the divine. And when we aren't in practice of it, in consistent practice of it, not just here and there, right? It's like going to the gym. You're not going to get the results that you're looking for if you just show up once in a while. This is a daily practice of it. It's your spirituality. It really is your humanness. When we talk about becoming or getting in touch with our humanness, that's what it's about. It's about recognizing your divine self, your heart, your being. And when you can combine, and I talk a lot about the mind-heart coherence, when you can combine awareness, the knowing from the mind and the ego and the things that sort of you've been conditioned to think and feel and be, your personality, combined with your heart, which is pure, there is a sense of no longer being in lack. There's a sense, well, I no longer need to fill anything or fix anything. I now am who I am, flaws and all. And here I am.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of courage.
Yeah. And when there's 2 people together in that here I amness, I think that's pure magic. That is, in many ways, the divine relationship, the divine partnership that we're talking about here today, the divine love, right? It's another way that I describe it is we are beautiful, divine aspects of the whole that are a part of an interconnected connected collective that has a force of expansion. As you talked about earlier, that expansion is not just on an individual level, that expansion is on a collective level. So when you get two souls that have remembered their expansion, their baseline bliss, and then they're coming together, it's that same expansion on an individual level, but now it's doubled, right? So it's magic. It's pure creation in many ways. I want to take another detour here, or not a tangent, but another part of this, a pillar of all this. In our pre-chat, my lovely friend, we were talking about some of these shadows that come up from the past and barriers and elements of past disconnection. And you referenced a term called having an exit door, two people with an exit door. When you come together, I'm wondering if you could explain, what does this mean? And maybe what can we do to overcome this exit door?
Well, the exit door I was describing was when I work with couples. One of the things that I really encourage them to do is to notice where the exit doors are and seal the container as tight as you can get it, because you don't want to leak out any energy or have in the back of your mind this out of an experience. Now, of course, this doesn't apply to if you're in a relationship that's causing harm to you or anyone else. That's different. I'm talking about two divine souls meeting and having an experience together. Having a back door oftentimes means that I am ready to leave whenever we're in conflict, or whenever there's hardships, or whenever I'm in judgment, or for some people, whenever they're on their menstrual cycle, whatever it means, right? Then I hear that a lot, where you turn to that. Well, then I'm just going to leave. Then you probably don't even want to be with me. And it's just a protective measure that even in the words that people use to try to leave, oftentimes it sounds very infantile. It's not coming from your adult self. It's coming from the child self, right? Mm-hmm. It's almost like a child throwing a fit. Fine, then I'm not going to be your friend.
I guess what comes up from that, Ozzy, is because I can feel it in my own being as you're describing it. So you said seal the container and those exit doors. What does that sealing practically look like in a dynamic?
So 2 feet in. So it's really hard for me to be here, but I'm here to learn, and I'm practicing with you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's communicating. It's being in practice with noticing when you're feeling as though the exit door is an option, and verbalizing it, whether to your partner, to yourself. First to yourself, you want to be, this is the honesty, right? Oh God, this sucks. And explaining and talking about it, talking through it, either with yourself, with your loved ones, with your partner, whomever is a safe space for you to share that with. I think it's important. And again, being in a divine relationship with yourself and others doesn't mean it's void of hardships. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be rainbows and butterflies. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's when you are aware, you are noticing everything. And so when you become the observer of your experience, well, now you could get a little more curious and you can play this game. I play this game with myself. I don't know if you had this when you were growing up. When I was growing up many years ago, there were a series of books called Choose Your Own Adventure. And in Choose Your Own Adventure, when you're opening Choose Your Own Adventure book, each chapter has you making a choice. And as you read the story, you can make a choice to either go to page 10 or go to page 15 or stay for the next chapter. And I see life this way too. I kind of play this game with myself when I get through, right? When you go through a chapter, you have a choice. How do I want to show up? Who am I being today? And where do I want to go?
Mm.
And when you can convince yourself, and maybe convincing is not the right word, but when you can get to allow, thank you, the allowance. Yep. When you can allow yourself to have choices, you're not sitting in this place where now you feel as though you have no choice. And then you feel like as though your freedom is robbed. And now everyone else is on the hook for why you feel the opposite of freedom.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think when you can, again, recognize it, communicate it, and give yourself a choice, now you go in a different direction.
Yeah. I love it. That analogy, choose your own adventure. Such a long time I had that on my Facebook profile as how I saw life as well in many ways. But I'll just add to what you're saying here. I think it's choice. I agree with you, but I would add a little extra flair. I think it's a judgment-free choice. Whatever choice in the moment you feel like you need to make, I think we also need to be mindful that we remove all judgment around what that choice is. Because sometimes that choice isn't going to be pleasant. Sometimes that choice isn't going to be comfortable. Sometimes that choice is going to come with suppressed emotions, heavy guilt, heavy shame, heavy anger, heavy, so many. And it's so easy for us in that moment to then almost take back that choice with our own judgment around it. So I share this because I've noticed in my own relationship dynamics, holding space for not just the other partner, the other person to do this, but holding space for yourself to make these divine choices judgment-free and then seeing what happens. Because I think most of us, and I'd love to get your reflections on this, Ozzy, the reason that the communication isn't there, or the reason that the authentic expression isn't there, is because we're holding on to these judgments. We're either holding on to them or we keep placing them on the new choices we wish to make. Do you agree with that?
Yes. And I'm also going to remind you and the listeners that being judgment free is also a very hard practice because we are wired for judgment and mostly because it's our way of protecting ourselves. And so I think it's really.
Do you think it's wired or programmed?
I think it's both. I think that there's a few different kinds of judgments that we have. I think it's about being the observer of the judgment and making a choice from there, because I often feel like my first responder is judgment because I know that I'm scared in the moment, or I know that I have a decision to make that's much bigger than I expected or anticipated. And so for me, when the judgment comes, it's what I do with the judgment that makes more of a difference than putting the pressure on myself to be judgment free. While I think it's a very novel idea for all of us, but I also think it's as a human being, it's a tall order. We could get there at some point, I think, but I also think that I think for me, it's more about grace and compassion. And when we notice and we observe that all of a sudden a judgment is deciding to show up,
you invite those in.
Yeah, hey, I see you. Not today.
Yeah.
I'm not interested in today. Thank you for showing up. I know you're scared.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do something different, but thank you.
Yeah.
Right. So you come with gratitude, you come with grace, and that to me feels a little bit more gentler. And I'll pivot here in saying that comes from my own practice of self-parenting. And it's what I also teach my clients. It's learning how to hone in a parental loving voice that is a little bit more gentle.
You read my heart. So let's go into this, because what you just beautifully highlighted, I call that parental energy holding the child. Each time that aspect comes up, and it's not just judgment, all of the shadows that come up, I refer to it as holding the child. You hold this aspect of you as if you would hold an actual physical child that is in pain and harm. You don't hold it expecting it or pushing it to go a certain direction. You hold it from this space of not just grace, but unconditional love, right? And I want to come back to that because I know you have thoughts on unconditional love. But let's hone in on the inner child work. And I'll stimulate this by asking the question, within this divine relationship, divine partnership conversation, what is the necessity for either the individuals to be doing their own inner child work and or the relationship dynamic to be doing inner child work together? What are your thoughts on this?
100% agree with you on doing the inner child work separately. I think together, unless you have a practitioner working with you on this, it gets a little dicey, because one of the things we see, one of the dynamics that we see in relationship is where the relationship becomes parental. One becomes a child and the other becomes a parent, and that kills polarity. That does not fuel the attraction that fuels romantic relationships. So we want to be mindful of that, because it is not your partner's job to be the parent that you need to heal with. It is your job to heal your relationship perception of that parent that might have let you down. And I think I believe that the reason why we have all this judgment, a lot of the conditioned judgment that we have, is most of our parents taught us judgment because
of their own wounds.
Of their own wounds, exactly. And so I think the parental voice we're used to is of judgment, is of harshness. It's the opposite of holding the baby and taking care of the baby. So in a romantic relationship, I do not recommend doing the inner child work together. I don't know if there are people out there that do teach that. It may work. In my line of work with my practice, I don't do this with my clients. I do individual parental work with them. And oftentimes it's even me stimulating a parent, a loving, kind parent, for them to experience this love, this divine love that they might not have experienced in their past. And this really helps them sort of feel into, oh, okay, I can do this.
Do this for myself. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think that's a really interesting point. And I think I tend to agree with you. I think it's possible, but as you said, there either has to be a practitioner or both parties have to be very consciously aware of their energetics, what they're projecting, what they're receiving. And it's interesting that you said getting the partner to maybe unconsciously at first feel that parental role is a killer of the energy. When we are in a healthy, unhealthy, codependent relationship, that is what we're doing, right? That's unconsciously, before we start to heal these wounds, those are the types of partners we're bringing into our world, right? We are attracting in partners that we are unconsciously putting in the role of the caregiver that we had an unhealthy attachment with. And until we do, as you said, that inner reparenting work for ourselves, as Jung says, the unconscious will continue to project into the outside world, and we will call it fate, right? We will call it fate in the partners that we end up attracting. So yeah. I just want to make sure everyone heard that, because it's a very, very clear distinction, right? Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, and I should have asked you to expand on what you meant by doing child work with a partner. So I'll ask you, I'll throw it back to you and ask, what does that look like for you when you ask that question?
Well, so I'm yet to do this with a partner well, that's not true. I've tested it out. And I guess what it looks like when I think of it looking balanced and it looking very energetically, consciously and energetically aware, it's two people holding a container for themselves, two people holding a container for each other, and acknowledging the needs that need to be met, right? In many ways, I see inner child work as talking to that little inner being inside of you and asking, what do they need? What was left undone? And then you as the reparent meeting that need. But then in a couple, I think in many ways it looks like showing examples of what that looks like and not getting them to fill that need, but showing the partner, showing the other person in the relationship what it may look like to, for example, touch oneself, right, in a very caressing way, or hold oneself so that person can cry and release. So I think in many ways it's a mirror. A two people in a divine relationship doing inner child work is holding up a mirror for each other. How does that resonate with you, Ozzy?
Yeah, I think it's important for you to understand your partner's nuances, your partner's triggers, your partner's traumas. I think it's important so that you can hold space and you can notice at a time when they're when their inner child is acting out and wanting attention or needing a certain something. Your job is not to be to step in as dad and say, okay, I'm going to take care of you, right? Your job really is to be in your divine masculine energy and just be. Your presence is enough without needing to be or partake in their parent. Their and your inner child work will play out. But it is not your job to fill the role as dad or fill the role as mom or fill the role of whatever caretaker you grew up with or that you need. Your job is simply to be you and remind your partner, I'm here. I got you. Right? And that's not mom or dad. That's just, I'm your partner.
Yeah.
Right? So yes, it is supporting the container and also not necessarily also guiding and leading in a way and giving direction for the inner child to come back into her beautiful goddess self, into her or him, into his God self, right? And just reminding, even you could do that with your energy, with your groundedness, that could just be enough. And I think really what we seek in relationships in certain moments, and there are moments, sometimes we're very creative together and sometimes we're adventurous and then sometimes we're bratty, right? There's something we need. The inner child part of us needs something. And so as the one adult in that moment can kind of step in and just say, what do you need? How can I support you?
Yeah. As I'm listening to you speak all of this, it highlights a very important understanding we need to accept about ourselves. And I'm sure you've come to this acknowledgement in yourself, Ozzy, and I have, but I want to make sure people listening in really see this. As we go deeper into our awakening, coming back to our source, our spiritual love, our cosmic love antenna, one of the symptoms of all that is we become more sensitive. We become more attuned to not just the outside world, but we also become more attuned to our inner world. And as I'm hearing you speak about all these beautiful nuances of just this inner child example within a divine relationship, none of that would be possible if you shut down your sensitivities. If you, and I'll get your thoughts on this, if you go with the dogma and the belief that being sensitive is a weakness or being emotional is too much, or being, the one that I heard growing up, being a man, if you are sensitive and expressing your feminine feelings, that is a weakness, that is unmanly. So more of a comment, but I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on this sensitivity playing a role in understanding the nuances of this divine partnership?
Yeah, I think that we all have habits. It's not who we really are, the sensitive part of us. We all have that. Like I said, the bratty part of us, the wise part of us, or many different fragments and parts of us that we've been conditioned to be in order to survive this world. And so we learn at a very young age through conditioning, through our environment, through our parents, caregivers, schools, whatever environment we are immersed in. We take on other people's beliefs and other people's fears as though it's our own, and we make it our identity. And so the work is really about, first of all, knowing that the external world is just, it's a matrix. It's just your projected minutia, whatever.
Consciousness state.
Consciousness.
I would say.
Yeah. And so if we simply focus on that, and not really focus on and sort of going internal and healing and being with the internal and all parts of yourself. I think I just went in a completely different direction, didn't I?
No, you're good, Ozzy. I guess the point I'm trying to highlight for everyone, and you are expanding on it, is, again, we keep coming back to this theme of embracing and accepting all of yourself. Right. And that is really a gateway back. But speaking of that, I want to throw in this point here. And I'm not sure if you have worked with couples that have had this experience, but we'll see. And I want to get your thoughts either way. In my experience, in my upbringing, I experienced sexual trauma. And I know many people tuning into this show have had their own story of that. And sexual trauma manifests in many ways. But I've noticed in my journey, in my relationships, especially the ones that I want to be divine and create divine connection around, intimacy around, sexual trauma, any kind of trauma, but specifically sexual trauma, tends to come up and play a role, especially in relationship to guilt, shame, and sexual pleasure. So I'm wondering, what are some of your thoughts, Ozzy, either personally or maybe in some of the work that you've done? How does one start to move through this on the road back to a divine relationship and divine partnership?
Well, first, I want to extend my deepest sorries to you for having to experience that. That is just awful. And I'm sorry that you had to go through that. And anyone else that's listening that might have experienced that, any sort of trauma, that especially sexual trauma, that really taps into where our deepest, most pleasurable experiences get to come from, right? I mean, there's so much creation when you're talking about that part of your body, that chakra, right? And when it's been injured, we tend to take on other aspects. And like you mentioned, shame and guilt and more self-inflicted pain and thoughts, right? Just these thoughts that really expand more of that trauma and keep us that small, keep us that, right? Because most sexual trauma creates and leaves behind a sense of victimhood, a sense of innocence robbed. And so I think the first thing is to really work on forgiveness, forgiveness of self.
Yeah, big one.
And then forgiveness of any perpetrators. Because when we can practice a really true practice of forgiveness, it's really about the letting go. It's not about the forgetting, but it's really about the letting go and taking back your power, because without it, it's very hard to expand. It's very hard to find the courage to step into a relationship and trust that something isn't going to be taken from you. So I think it's important for us to start there.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start to first speak it out loud, then you start to separate it from you so that it's no longer your identity. It's not what you walk around with. You're not wearing that badge of, hey, I'm a sexual victim, or I'm a victim of sexual abuse. Now it's more about, I went through that and I carried a lot of shame around it, and I'm ready to let that go. And I'm ready to take back my power, and I'm ready to really see myself in a different light. And I'm ready to see the rest of the world from a different light. And I'm no longer going to allow anyone or anything to take anything from me. I now have a choice. I'm an adult. And so I think if you could begin there, then that could be a wise first choice, if that feels good to you.
Personally, I just want to love on you, my friend, for such a compassionate and love-infused response to that. I thought that was beautiful, and I could really feel it in my heart as you were expressing that. I would add a piece to this, and I think everything you said is a foundation. But I want to add a potentially controversial aspect to this. And if people are reading my new book, I talk about this in my book, and I share my experience. And one of the reasons I shared my experience is for what I'm about to say. One of the ways we take our power back from that situation, from that abuse, from that pain, is remembering, and we've already spoken about this today, that the external world, not just our relationships, but the external world full stop, is a mirror for that which needs to be seen internally. And what I'm getting at here is, and this is the controversial component, that abuse, and I'll just speak from my own experience and how I moved through it. That abuse, that experience, that event, there was something there. There was something in it. It didn't just happen to me, it happened for me. And part of shifting out of the victim, as you beautifully highlighted, is starting to see that, not just in these traumatic events, but in all events. Right? There is always a seed of treasure, or as Joseph Campbell says, the cave that we fear to enter holds the treasures that we seek. So that cave of trauma and sexual pain holds a seed of treasure that we're not seeing. And this is what I'd love to get your views on. It is up to us to venture into that cave. No one else is going to do it for us. No one else. We can hire as many coaches, as many healers, as many doctors, as many practitioners to quote unquote heal us. But none of that will change unless you make the choice. And it may come from being supported by someone else, but ultimately it is your choice to go into that cave to pull out that treasure. What are your thoughts on this, Ozzy?
I love that. I love that quote. Yeah, it is our job to go in there and I myself was not I did not experience sexual abuse. I did experience abuse from my mom. And so carrying that to my adult life as I was going through my own transformation. That's one of the things that I learned too. It didn't happen to me, it happened for me. And it took a while to get there. It's something that's not very easy to tell someone who experienced some pretty awful trauma. But when you get to it and you get to understand, it helps you separate from it, and it helps you create a new identity. And when you could create a new identity and you could come to terms with, okay, it is my job to enter this cave. It is my job to see these shadows. It is my job to hold space and allow for this to be for me. Because if I don't allow it to be for me, it will always be to me. And then I am now the victim of everything. And then I will keep everyone on the hook for that for the rest of my life, because then someone has to pay for it. So now we make other partners or other relationships, we give the role of that perpetrator to them. And that's something that we see often in relationships, is that people will give that role of
reject.
And then reject and expect right? The expectation is that you get to pay for what you did for me, right? And then now it becomes someone else's responsibility. And when it becomes someone else's responsibility, that person doesn't know how to handle it or what to do with it. So I think, again, going back to what you said, you are the only person that could enter that cave and receive that treasure. And it's mucky and it's crunchy. I'm saying that word a lot today.
Yeah,
I'm
I love
craving
it.
some crunchiness.
It's
And
beautiful.
I'm going to remind you today and every day that we can do hard things. We've done them before and we've survived every single one of them. And I think knowing that can really support us in those moments, those seasons that feel so what's the word I'm looking for?
Tumultuous.
Yeah.
Talk about
Helpless.
this. Helpless works. I could talk about this all day with you, Ozzy. And I think you're a beautiful advocate for this kind of work. I want to just highlight Jenna for popping into the Facebook chat. Happy that quote, the external world is a mirror of that which needs to be seen internally. Happy it resonated, my friend. I have a few more questions here for you, Ozzy, before I let you go. And this next one, I'll see. I don't know where I'm going to land on this, but it definitely brought up something when we spoke about it earlier in our pre-chat, and I want to see you. I want to hear you expand on it beautifully. A big part of this divine conversation and finding partnership and relationship is really understanding the balance between conditional and unconditional love. And a big part of this show is really talking about this dynamic. And I'll put a episode in the show notes for people tuning in. I did an episode breaking down the difference and the need for both, in my opinion, conditional and unconditional. But Ozzy, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have the opinion, I'll quote you here, of, I don't believe that there is an unconditional for the human experience. So I'm wondering if you could expand on this and what you mean by this.
Yeah, I think it's a noble dream. I think we are wired for conditions. We deal with conditions. I'm not saying it's good to be in conditions. I think it's actually makes things even that much harder. Relationships become much harder when we have all these conditions and we're so set in our ways. I think we need to learn more resilience and flexibility with our conditions so that boundaries are conditions, right? And boundaries are wonderful for us. But I think that I think it's the same thing as maybe this expectation of altruism. I think there's always going to be a part of us that's going to be somewhat conditional and somewhat. So I almost feel it's unattainable. I think we just get to start step by step, maybe walking towards an unconditional life. But it's the same thing as we say that and I'm so happy that I'm hearing a lot of this more and more now, is that you don't always have to be positive. You don't always have to be loving. You don't always have to be anything other than what you are in this moment. And so I think it goes to say you don't always have to be unconditional. I think sometimes maybe conditions need to enter in. And so this idea of this unconditional love, I'm going to challenge it. I think it's in a perfect world, God, wouldn't that be nice? But even as much as I try to be in the unconditional, there's always that condition, like flipping creeps in, says hello. So I really think it's about what do we do when the conditions come in, and can we ask the conditions some questions, and can we see how flexible the conditions can be so that I could actually experience love and I could open my heart wide open so that I can receive. And so I think that's why I said to you, I don't think it really exists. Again, same thing as altruism. Does altruism really exist?
Yeah. So I'm going to respond in this way to this, Ozzy, and I'm going to compassionately push back to this, because I would actually say, even in this conversation today, we've you've shown an example of how the human can be unconditional, but I'll come back to that because I want to explain how I see this. And in the episode I did on this topic, this was my main point. It's not an or conversation. It's an and conversation. In this human experience, we are conditional and we are unconditional. Another way of describing it is we are a eternal spiritual being having a messy human experience. How would you describe that eternal spiritual being? It is made of pure unconditional love. How would you describe that messy human being? It is made of a lot of lovely and messy conditions. So in many ways, that's probably the simplest way I would describe it is it's always a dance between both. It's a dance between the conditions of the human that needs to have 8 hours of sleep tonight because if he doesn't, tomorrow he's going to be cranky in that divine relationship that he loves. But then this is what I was talking about before when I said you gave an example of when the human is unconditional. When we hold the child, when we talked about holding the child today, both an internal aspect or an actual physical child, what is the frequency of love that parent is showing that child? It's unconditional in many ways. It's one of that divine, that messy human tapping into their divine state of unconditional love. So this, I think, and this is just my experience, my views on it, but I think this is obtainable. I think this, if we can see it rather than it's not one or the other, but a beautiful cosmic dance between what is needed and what is not in any given moment, I think that's the conversation. What are your thoughts, my friend?
I agree. Yes. When we first were talking about the unconditional, I thought that there was sort of this goal that we want to obtain at some point and as to always be. But I agree with you. It's both and. There are moments like we can't always be, and maybe I should have added to what I said that it's both unconditional and conditional in sort of mix in together. It's both messy and beautiful. It's both loving and void of love. It's the human experience. It's messy and it's also very loving. And I agree with you. I thank you for shedding light on that in that way, because it 100% makes sense.
Yeah,
I'm on board.
And I share it because it's what's illuminated me, right? When I've held that same confusion around it. So,
yeah. And I also bet that it also helps moments where you're feeling unconditional. Now you're feeling guilty of when you're feeling conditional or in judgment, and you notice yourself doing that. So now you're feeling guilty and you're shaming yourself. It can also help to just say, wait a minute, I'm just having one moment of being conditional or one moment of being in judgment. Can I give myself some grace here?
Yes.
And then you can return back to a different state of being. That's all it is. It's just a state of being.
Nailed it. Yeah. Ozzy, I love you very much. I really enjoyed this flow today. It was a beautiful dance as expected. I have one more question for you before I let you go. But before I get to that, I do want to give you the opportunity now for people that have either tuned in live. Currently, I see you there, Jenna, there holding space. Or if you're listening to this podcast as the replay, as the episode, and you've connected to Ozzy and her light and her love, is there anything you want to share in terms of your work in the world, my friend? I know you do coaching. What does all of that look like?
Yeah. So currently I offer one-on-one coaching, working on doing some group coaching and some courses as well as workshops. I also being guests on different podcasts and now with my lovely
pretty
high-end equipment. Yep. And I'm on Instagram oftentimes creating content to share with the world so that I don't like to hang on to my learnings. I like to share. And so for me, it's always about, one of the things I often say in my lives is, can you consider this? That's always about offering considerations for a different outlook, just like you did with me today. Because when we learn how to be flexible, we're less resilient, or we're more resilient. We're less resistant, and we can be more in the receiving.
For people tuning in, I'll put all of Ozzy's connections, her website, her social media handle in the show notes, so you can just click on them, go straight to there. What is your website, just for people that, just in case they don't click it? What's your website, Ozzy, for people that want more information?
A small reflection of an old part of me. It needs a lot of updating. It's www.ozzyosborne.com. And Ozzy is OZZIEOSBORNE.com. And I do get a lot of questions about my name.
And I love how you lean into it and embrace it fully. Ozzy, my last question here for you today as we wrap up. This is the Cosmic Love Antenna. And a big theme of it, as we've danced around today, is really understanding what love is at its deepest of levels. So I'm wondering, in your own personal world, in your own dimension of consciousness, how do you define that love word personally?
I define it as not a thing and not a destination. I define it as our essence. That's who we are at the soul. We're born into love and we leave with love. And so it's not something I get to attain. It's something I get to open to. And it's an everyday choice and reminder, really.
Something I get to open to. It was never gone and never lost. But we have to make that powerful choice in the end, right?
Yeah.
Ozzy, thank you for your presence and your beautiful smile and your lovely, pretty mic today. For all the people tuning in to the show, we hope this brought you value, guidance, and love. If you joined live, please remember to leave any comments, extra questions that we can see later. I know Ozzy will probably jump into the chat and respond if anything came up. If you're listening to this on the podcast player, please share this out far and wide. Leave any comments in reviews. But regardless, we send you love, we send you light. Until next time here on the show, we'll see you again very soon. Bye, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Cosmic Love Antenna with me, your host, Harrison. If you gained value or this episode hit your heart, please remember to share this out with a friend, a family member, or a lover. You can also leave your love over on Apple reviews and Spotify star feedback, and this helps me spread my frequency to more souls in need. Finally, if you want to connect with me deeper, want to reach out, interested in coaching, please follow me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn at Harrison Meagher, spelled Meagher. Sending you so much love.